Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. We're going to completely flip how you think about research ethics today. You know, when we hear the word ethics, it's super easy to just picture this giant stack of boring paperwork, right? Or some annoying institutional hoop you've got to jump through before getting to the fun part of your project. But today, we're actually going to look at why ethical practice and qualitative research is literally the living, breathing heartbeat of your entire study.
So, I want you to ask yourself, is a signed form enough? If you're thinking that just grabbing a quick signature on page 3 means your ethical obligations are totally finished, well, you might actually be putting the very people you want to study at significant risk.
Here's the roadmap for what we're covering. First, we'll look beyond the ethics checkbox. Second, we're rethinking the whole consent process. Third, navigating power, privacy, and harm. Fourth, we'll see some real-world ethics in action. And finally, we'll wrap up with your step-by-step roadmap.
All right, part 1, beyond the ethics checkbox. So here's the thing. When you're conducting qualitative research, stuff like interviews, ethnography, action research, you're not just sending out some anonymous survey. You're engaging in close, sustained, and really personal contact. Because you're so deeply immersed in your participants' daily lives, you risk exposing them way more than a simple statistic ever could. You end up creating what we call thick description. That's this incredibly rich, detailed reporting that can actually make a participant highly identifiable if you aren't super careful.
Now, underlying all of these practical safeguards is the Belmont Report framework. It boils down to 3 foundational principles for human subjects research. First up, respect for persons, basically treating people as autonomous decision-makers. Then, beneficence, which is just a fancy word for maximizing the benefits while actively minimizing the harm. And finally, justice. This just ensures the burdens and the benefits of your research are shared fairly across groups. Honestly, every single rule we follow stems right back to these 3 core ideas.
Moving on to part 2, rethinking the consent process.
This is a massive paradigm shift, guys. Consent is not just a one-and-done singular event. Enter the concept of process consent. If you're doing long-term ethnographic or action research, you've got to honor a participant's genuine right to withdraw at absolutely any time. Think about it. A signature from 6 months ago doesn't mean they're still comfortable being observed today. I mean, people change their minds about what they had for breakfast, let alone participating in a year-long study. You have to periodically check in and reconfirm that they're still on board.
But, obviously you do still need that initial form to start. To make sure consent is genuinely informed and not just some nominal paper compliance, your form has to lay out a few specific things clearly. You've got to use plain, accessible language, no jargon. Participants need to know exactly how much time it's going to take, what the foreseeable risks are, exactly how their identity is going to be protected, and, this is crucial, their absolute right to just walk away without any penalty. Oh, and don't forget to include your contact info. Also, keep in mind who is actually reading that form. When we hear vulnerable populations, we usually just picture children. But in applied linguistics and social research, vulnerability goes way beyond just minors. You might be working with undocumented immigrants who quite rightly fear that participating could expose their status. Or maybe trauma survivors, where your interview questions could trigger serious distress. For these groups, you might need to have referral lists for support services ready to go or give explicit written guarantees about their immigration status. You absolutely must tailor your care to their specific reality.
Okay, part 3, power, privacy, and harm.
So there's a really common confusion between 2 distinct terms here. Anonymity means even you, the researcher, have zero idea who the data came from, kind of like an anonymous online poll. But in qualitative interviews, true anonymity is virtually impossible. You're literally sitting right across from them. So instead, we have to rigorously rely on confidentiality. That means you know who they are, but you use pseudonyms and actively alter identifying details, like their specific school name or a super unique job role, so outsiders can't piece the puzzle together.
Which brings us to a really tricky ethical challenge, power dynamics. Because qualitative researchers build such close relationships, power imbalances are genuinely dangerous. Say you're a teacher researching your own students or a supervisor interviewing your employees, you've got to practice ongoing reflexivity about how that dual role pressures their responses. A student terrified of getting a bad grade? Yeah, they might just tell you whatever they think you want to hear. You have to design your study from the ground up to minimize that coercive pressure.
And managing that power dynamic is really just one piece of avoiding harm altogether. The reality here is, you have to plan exactly how to handle severe risks before data collection even begins. No improvising in the moment.
What if a teacher's critical comments about their school get traced back to them and they get fired? Or what if a participant unexpectedly discloses abuse during an interview? You literally cannot figure out your response on the fly. You've got to have an ethical protocol established from day one.
All right, part 4, real-world ethics in action.
Let's dive into a specific case where an employer's totally well-meaning help actually risks coercing employees. Picture this. You're running an interview study on adult immigrant workers learning workplace English. The boss says, "Hey, I'd love to help. I'll just stand up at the next staff meeting, endorse your study, and tell everyone to sign up."
Sounds super helpful, right? Actually, wrong. We have a massive power dynamics problem here. If the boss is visibly endorsing this and collecting names, employees might feel like they absolutely have to participate just to keep their jobs, or they might be terrified the boss will hear their answers. This completely destroys the whole concept of voluntary, uncoerced consent.
So how do we actually fix this? By creating a firewall between the employer and the data. First, you politely decline the boss's direct recruitment offer. Instead, you put up neutral flyers so workers can reach out to you privately on their own time. You ensure the consent form explicitly states the boss will never know if they participated. You do the interviews off-site, outside of work hours. And when you're writing the final report, you don't use highly specific job titles. You use something generalized, like warehouse role, so nobody can be identified. Finally, you confirm their ongoing consent before every single follow-up.
And finally, part 5, your step-by-step roadmap.
Consider this your chronological checklist, and this must be completed before a single piece of data is collected, ensuring you aren't just doing damage control later on. First, identify the risks and draft that plain language consent form. Next, plan recruitment methods that neutralize coercive pressure. Then, lock in your anonymization strategy. Submit the whole plan for Institutional Ethics Review, your IRB, and actually wait for their approval. After that, build in your ongoing consent checks. And lastly, plan your reporting safeguards, like member checking, where you actually let participants review how their words are being used.
Along this journey, there are a few common pitfalls you absolutely must avoid. First, do not treat consent as a one-time formality. Never assume that just because a study seems low risk, you can skip the ethics review. IRB paperwork is boring is definitely not a valid excuse. Don't just use a pseudonym, but leave in some unique, recognizable detail. Don't let a gatekeeper recruit for you, and please never distort a quote or ignore inconvenient data just to make your final report look cleaner.
Ultimately, true ethics isn't just about getting a piece of paper signed. It's an empathetic, living relationship between you and your participants. It's an ongoing responsibility that tracks from the very first moment you conceptualize your study, all the way to the day you publish those findings. It's about making sure respect, beneficence, and justice are actually practiced, not just preached. As you embark on your own research journey, I want to leave you with this final thought. Ethical, qualitative research always begins with looking in the mirror. Before you ask a single question of a participant, you need to ask this of yourself. How does who I am influence the people I want to understand? Honestly, reflecting on your own power and background, that is where true research ethics actually begins.